The gunshot that rang out across the station platform sent passengers scattering in every direction, and Sophia Daniels dropped to her knees behind a wooden bench as chaos erupted around her in the bitter December cold of 1883. She had been waiting for the train from Salt Lake City to Tropic, Utah, for over 3 hours already, watching the snow pile higher and higher on the empty tracks, when the robbery attempt shattered the afternoon quiet. Her carpetbag lay a few feet away, all her worldly possessions inside it, and she desperately wanted to grab it, but the sound of more gunfire kept her pressed against the rough wooden planks of the bench. Her breath came in visible puffs in the frigid air, her fingers already numb despite her worn gloves. From somewhere to her left, she heard a man's voice ring out with authority, calm despite the violence. "Drop your weapons now. This doesn't have to end with anyone dying today." Sophia risked a glance around the edge of the bench and saw a tall figure standing in the open, seemingly unbothered by the danger. He wore a long duster coat that fell to his boots, and his hat was pulled low against the driving snow. His stance suggested confidence rather than bravado, and something about the way he held himself made her think this was not his first time facing down armed men. The three would-be robbers seemed to think twice about their plan when they saw him, their horses shifting nervously in the accumulating snow. "This ain't your business, cowboy," one of them called out, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "Everything that happens at this station is my business," the man replied evenly. "I work security for the railroad. Now you can ride out of here and pretend this never happened, or you can make me do this the hard way. Your choice, but you've got about 3 seconds to decide." The robbers exchanged glances. Then one by one they turned their horses and rode off into the white curtain of falling snow. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but Sophia's heart was still pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stayed crouched behind the bench until she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder and looked up to find the cowboy standing over her, his hand extended. "You can come out now, miss. They're gone." His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the desert, and when Sophia took his hand, she felt calluses that spoke of hard work and long days. He pulled her to her feet with easy strength, then retrieved her carpetbag and handed it to her with a slight nod. "Thank you," she managed, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "That was very brave. Just doing my job, miss." He studied her face for a moment, and she wondered what he saw there. "You heading to Tropic?" "Yes, I'm supposed to start teaching at the schoolhouse there after the new year." She hugged the carpetbag to her chest, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must look after hours of travel and then cowering behind a bench. "Is the train going to arrive soon? I've been waiting since before noon." The cowboy glanced at the tracks, now buried under at least 6 inches of fresh snow, and shook his head slowly. "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but the train isn't coming today. Probably not tomorrow either with this storm. The telegraph operator got word about an hour ago that the line is blocked by drifts about 20 miles north of here. They're working to clear it, but in this weather it could take days." Sophia felt her stomach drop. "Days? But I don't have anywhere to stay. I used almost all my money to get this far, and I'm expected in Tropic by the end of the week." "How were you planning to get from here to Tropic?" he asked, his brow furrowing with what looked like genuine concern. "The train was supposed to take me within a few miles, and the school board arranged for someone to meet me and take me the rest of the way by wagon." She looked around at the nearly deserted station, at the few other stranded passengers huddled inside the small building. "I suppose that plan is ruined now." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia could almost see him thinking through the problem. Finally, he said, "My name is Isaac Anderson. I've been working security here for about 6 months, but before that I spent 5 years cowboying in the high country around here. I know the territory between here and Tropic like the back of my hand, and I own a good horse and pack mule. If you're willing to trust a stranger, I could guide you there myself once this storm breaks." Sophia stared at him, trying to read his intentions. Everything about him seemed honest and straightforward, from his weathered face to his steady gaze, but she had been raised to be cautious about men she did not know. Still, what choice did she have? She could not afford to stay at the station indefinitely, and if she did not arrive in Tropic soon, she might lose the teaching position entirely. "Why would you do that?" she asked carefully. "You said yourself you work for the railroad." "I've been meaning to head down that way anyway," Isaac said, which did not quite answer her question but somehow satisfied it nonetheless. "My sister married a rancher near Tropic a few years back, and I promised I'd visit before the year was out. This storm probably means the railroad won't need me here for a while anyway. Seems like we could help each other out." Something in his tone, or perhaps the kindness in his eyes, made Sophia decide to take the risk. "All right then, Mr. Anderson. I accept your offer and I'm very grateful for it. My name is Sophia Daniels. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Daniels, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Isaac gestured toward the station building. "Let's get you inside where it's warmer. I've got a room at the boarding house next door where I've been staying during my stint here. I'll arrange for you to have a room there too, and don't worry about the cost. The railroad compensates me well enough that I can spare it." "I couldn't possibly accept," Sophia began, but Isaac held up a hand. "You can and you will, because I'm not about to let you freeze out here or go hungry while we wait for the weather to clear. Consider it an advance payment for putting up with my company on the trail." He smiled then, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer and more approachable. "Besides, my mother would haunt me from the grave if she knew I'd let a lady struggle when I could easily help." They made their way through the deepening snow to the boarding house, a sturdy 2-story structure that looked like it had weathered many storms before this one. The proprietor, a stout woman named Mrs. Fletcher, greeted Isaac like an old friend and immediately set about preparing a room for Sophia. Within an hour, Sophia found herself in a small but clean room with a real bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out onto the white expanse of the storm. Mrs. Fletcher brought her hot soup and fresh bread, and for the first time since leaving her family home in Missouri 3 weeks ago, Sophia felt something close to safe. That evening, after she had changed into dry clothes and warmed herself by the fire in the common room, Isaac joined her with 2 cups of coffee. He settled into the chair across from her and said, "Tell me about this teaching job. What made you come all the way out here to Utah?" Sophia wrapped her hands around the warm cup and considered how much to share. "My father died 2 years ago, and my mother passed this spring. I have 3 younger brothers, but they've all gone their separate ways to find work. There wasn't anything left for me in Missouri except memories, and when I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in Tropic, it seemed like a sign, a chance to start fresh somewhere new." "That takes courage," Isaac said quietly. "This country isn't easy, especially for someone coming from back east. Tropic is a small Mormon settlement, very isolated. The nearest town of any size is hours away. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? I've taught school before in Missouri. I know how to handle children and their parents, and I'm not afraid of hard work." She met his eyes steadily. "And I'm not Mormon myself, but the school board knew that when they hired me. They said they just needed someone educated and capable who would treat all the children fairly." Isaac nodded slowly. "That's good. The folks down there are generally decent people, even if they keep to themselves quite a bit. My brother-in-law speaks highly of them." He took a sip of his coffee, then added, "What about you, Miss Daniels? You have someone waiting for you in Tropic." A fiancé or intended? The question was forward, but something about the way he asked it made Sophia think it mattered to him beyond simple curiosity. "No, Mr. Anderson. I'm going there alone and unattached. What about you? Is there a wife or sweetheart who'll be upset about you taking off to guide a stranger through the wilderness?" "No wife, no sweetheart. I was engaged once, about 4 years ago, but she decided she'd rather marry a banker than a cowboy. Can't say I blame her, really. This life doesn't offer much in the way of security or comfort." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a matter-of-fact acceptance that made Sophia warm to him even more. They talked for another hour, discovering small commonalities and differences in their histories. Isaac had grown up in Nevada, the son of a mining engineer who had died in a cave-in when Isaac was 16. He had spent the next decade working various jobs across the West, always moving, never quite settling. Sophia found herself drawn to his stories of wild horses and long cattle drives, of sleeping under endless stars and waking to mountains painted pink by the dawn. His world was so different from her own upbringing in a small Missouri town, yet she felt an unexpected kinship with him, perhaps because they were both wanderers in their own way, both searching for a place to belong. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, snow falling so thick that it was impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the windows. Sophia spent the time reading from the small collection of books Mrs. Fletcher kept in the common room, while Isaac checked on his horse and mule in the stable and made sure the other stranded passengers were managing all right. He seemed to take responsibility naturally, never making a fuss about it, but simply doing what needed to be done. Sophia watched him interact with an elderly couple who were worried about their supplies, saw how he reassured them, and shared his own provisions without hesitation, and she felt something shift in her chest. This was a good man, she thought, the kind who did right by people because it was simply who he was, not because he expected anything in return. By the second evening, the snow had finally stopped, leaving the world transformed into a pristine white landscape that glittered under the emerging stars. Isaac came to find Sophia after dinner and said, "If the weather holds, we can leave tomorrow morning. It's about 30 miles to Tropic from here, and in this snow it'll take us at least 2 days, maybe 3. Are you sure you're up for it? I don't have much choice, do I?" Sophia tried to smile, but the thought of riding through that vast whiteness made her nervous. She had ridden horses before, but never on a journey like this. Isaac seemed to sense her worry. "I'll keep you safe, Miss Daniels. I give you my word on that. I've traveled in worse conditions than this, and I know where the shelters and waypoints are. We'll take it slow and steady, no unnecessary risks." "I trust you," Sophia said, and realized as she spoke the words that they were true. In just 2 days, this cowboy had somehow earned her trust in a way few people ever had. They set out at first light the next morning, when the eastern sky was just beginning to pale with the promise of dawn. Isaac had provided Sophia with warmer clothes, including a heavy coat and fur-lined gloves that he said had belonged to his sister before she married. His horse was a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, and he had loaded the pack mule with supplies for the journey. Sophia rode a gentle mare that Isaac had borrowed from the livery stable, a steady animal that seemed unbothered by the snow. The world was utterly silent except for the crunch of the horses, hooves breaking through the frozen crust of snow. Sophia's breath hung in white clouds before her, and despite all her layers, The cold found its way through to her bones. But there was also a strange beauty to it. The way the morning sun turned the snow gold and pink. The way the mountains in the distance stood like sentinels against the pale sky. Isaac rode slightly ahead, breaking trail, and every so often he would turn in his saddle to check on her, making sure she was keeping up and staying warm. They stopped around midday in a sheltered canyon where Isaac built a small fire and heated coffee and beans. Sophia's legs ached from hours in the saddle, and her face felt raw from the cold, but she was determined not to complain. Isaac noticed anyway. "You're doing real well," he said as he handed her a tin cup of coffee. "A lot of folks would be whining by now, but you haven't said a word about it being hard." "It is hard," Sophia admitted, "but I knew it would be. And honestly, it's also kind of wonderful. I've never seen country like this before. It makes me feel very small, but in a good way, if that makes sense." Isaac's expression softened. "It makes perfect sense. That's what I love about this land. It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It just is, and you either learn to respect it or it'll break you." "Is that what happened with your fiancée? She couldn't respect it." He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "She never really tried. She wanted me to give up this life and move to San Francisco with her, work in her father's business. I considered it, because I cared about her, but I knew I'd wither away in a city. I need space and sky. I need to be able to see the horizon." He looked up at Sophia then. "What about you? Could you be happy in a place like Tropic? It's even smaller and more remote than where we are now." "I think so," Sophia said slowly. "I'm not running from space and sky, Mr. Anderson. I'm running from memories and expectations. As long as I can be useful, as long as I can teach children and make some kind of difference, I think I could be happy just about anywhere." They rode on through the afternoon, and as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Isaac led them to a small stone cabin that he said was maintained by travelers as a shelter. It was basic but dry, with a fireplace and a supply of wood stacked against one wall. Isaac got a fire going while Sophia unpacked their bedrolls and the food supplies. They ate a simple meal of dried meat, biscuits, and the last of the beans, and as darkness fell outside, they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. Sophia found herself telling Isaac things she had not planned to share, about how her mother's death had left her feeling unmoored, about her fears that she was not really cut out to be a teacher in such a remote place, about the dreams she had once had of traveling to Europe or studying at a university, dreams that seemed foolish now in the face of practical survival. Isaac listened without judgment, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and when she finally fell silent, he said, "Those dreams aren't foolish. Maybe they're not possible right now, but that doesn't make them wrong. My mother always said that a person without dreams is already dead inside. You just have to hold on to them and see what life brings." "What are your dreams, Isaac?" Sophia asked, using his first name for the first time without thinking about it. He smiled slightly at the familiarity but did not comment on it. "I dream about having a piece of land somewhere, maybe a small ranch where I could raise horses. Nothing grand, just enough to make a living and have some peace. I dream about maybe having a family someday, a wife and kids who don't mind that I'm not a fancy banker or a rich businessman. Simple things, I guess, but they matter to me." "They don't sound simple at all," Sophia said softly. "They sound like the most important things in the world." That night, Sophia lay in her bedroll on one side of the small cabin while Isaac slept on the other, and she found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been a stranger to this man, and now she felt like she had known him for years. There was an ease between them that surprised her, a comfort that she had not expected to find with anyone, especially not out here in this harsh and beautiful wilderness. She told herself not to read too much into it, that gratitude and proximity could create false feelings, but her heart seemed to have its own ideas about Isaac Anderson. They woke before dawn to find fresh snow falling again, light flurries that drifted down like feathers. Isaac frowned at the sky but said they could still make progress if they started early. They packed up and rode out as the gray light strengthened, following a trail that was barely visible under the new snow. The going was slower now, and several times Isaac had to dismount to check their route or clear a path through deeper drifts. Sophia watched him work, admiring his competence and his patience, the way he never seemed to get frustrated even when the conditions were clearly more difficult than he had anticipated. Around noon, they crested a ridge, and Isaac pointed down into a valley below. "Tropic is just beyond those bluffs. We should make it there by nightfall, maybe sooner if the weather cooperates." Sophia felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that their journey was almost over, that she would finally reach her destination and begin the life she had come here to build. But also disappointment that her time with Isaac was coming to an end. She tried to push that feeling aside, telling herself it was ridiculous to feel attached to someone she barely knew, but it persisted nonetheless. They descended into the valley as the afternoon wore on, and the snow tapered off to occasional flurries. The landscape here was different from the high country they had been traveling through, more open and somehow gentler despite the cold. Sophia could see scattered ranches in the distance, thin ribbons of smoke rising from their chimneys. It looked almost inviting, and she allowed herself to hope that maybe this could become home after all. But as they neared the outskirts of Tropic itself, they found the small station platform that marked the southern edge of the settlement, and Isaac pulled Copper to a halt. The platform was similar to the one where they had met, just a simple wooden structure with a bench and a small shelter for waiting passengers. Snow covered everything, pristine and undisturbed, and for some reason Isaac just sat there, staring at it. "Is something wrong?" Sophia asked, bringing her mare up beside him. Isaac turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "No, nothing's wrong. I just realized something, that's all." "What?" He dismounted and came to stand beside her mare, looking up at her. "I've been waiting at this station my whole life, Sophia. Not literally, but in every way that matters. Waiting for something or someone to make sense of all the wandering I've been doing. And then a few days ago you showed up, and even though the train didn't come and the snow kept falling, I didn't mind the waiting, because you were worth every minute of it." Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. "Isaac, we've only known each other for a few days. I know that. And maybe I'm crazy for saying this now. Maybe you'll think I'm just some foolish cowboy who doesn't know his own mind. But I learned a long time ago that life out here doesn't give you endless chances. You have to speak up when something matters, or you might lose it forever." He reached up and took her gloved hand in his. "I'm not asking you to marry me right this second. I'm not even asking you to promise me anything. I'm just asking if maybe once you get settled in Tropic, I could come courting. If maybe we could see where this goes, because I haven't felt this way about anyone in a very long time, and I don't want to let you ride away without saying so." Sophia looked down at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like a gift when she needed one most, who had kept her safe and treated her with respect, and somehow seen past all her defenses to the person she really was. She thought about his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he listened when she talked and never made her feel foolish for her fears or her dreams. And she thought about the way her heart lifted every time he smiled at her, the way she had found herself watching him when he thought she was not looking, memorizing the line of his jaw and the way his hands moved when he worked. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, you can come courting. I would like that very much." Isaac's face lit up with a smile that was pure joy, and he squeezed her hand before helping her dismount. They stood there together on the snow-covered platform, and Sophia thought that this moment, right here, might be one of the most important of her entire life. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but because it felt like a beginning, like the first page of a story that she actually wanted to read. They rode into tropic as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The settlement was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a main street, but it looked tidy and well kept. Isaac led them to a house at the edge of town where a woman came rushing out before they had even dismounted, calling his name. "Isaac, we got word from the station that you might be coming, but we didn't expect you in this weather." The woman was in her late 20s with kind eyes and a bright smile, and she threw her arms around Isaac with obvious affection. "Good to see you too, Hannah," Isaac said, hugging her back. Then he turned to Sophia. "This is my sister, Hannah Montgomery. Hannah, this is Miss Sophia Daniels. She's the new school teacher, and I guided her here from the station." Hannah's eyes went wide with understanding, and she immediately turned to Sophia with a welcoming smile. "Oh, Miss Daniels. We've been so worried about you. The school board sent word to the station 3 days ago that you hadn't arrived, and with this storm we were afraid something had happened. Thank goodness you're safe, and thank goodness my brother found you." "He saved my life, actually," Sophia said, and proceeded to tell Hannah about the robbery attempt and everything that followed. By the time she finished, Hannah was looking at her brother with obvious pride and affection. "That sounds just like him," Hannah said fondly. "Always helping people, even when it puts him at risk. Come inside, both of you. You must be frozen and exhausted. James will want to meet you both, and we have plenty of room for you to stay the night." The Montgomery house was warm and comfortable, and Hannah's husband James turned out to be a friendly man with a firm handshake and an easy laugh. Over dinner, Sophia learned that they had 2 young children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2, who were already asleep upstairs. James ran a cattle ranch a few miles outside town, and he spoke enthusiastically about the community and how it had grown in the past few years. "The schoolhouse is just down the road," Hannah told Sophia. "The teacher who was there before you got married and moved to Salt Lake City last summer. The children have been making do with lessons from their parents, but everyone will be so relieved to have a proper teacher again. There's a small cottage behind the schoolhouse where you'll be living. It's not fancy, but it's sturdy and it has a good stove." After dinner, Isaac walked Sophia to the schoolhouse to see her new home. The cottage was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a kitchen area, but it was clean and someone had clearly prepared it for her arrival. There was wood stacked by the stove, basic furniture, and even some supplies in the pantry. Sophia stood in the middle of the main room and tried to imagine herself living here, teaching in the schoolhouse just a few yards away, and it did not seem quite real yet. "What do you think?" Isaac asked from the doorway. "I think it's perfect," Sophia said honestly. "Or at least, it will be once I make it my own." Isaac nodded, then seemed to hesitate before saying, "I'll be staying with Hannah and James for a few days, helping James with some work around the ranch. After that, I'll need to head back to the station and let the railroad know I'm resigning my position there. But I'll come back, Sophia, if you still want me to." "I still want you to," Sophia said firmly, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "I meant what I said earlier. I want to see where this goes." "Then I'll be back before you know it," Isaac promised. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, a gesture so tender it made Sophia's eyes sting with sudden tears. "You get settled here, meet the town folks, start your teaching. And when I come back, we'll start this properly. Courting and dinners and all the things people do when they're figuring out if they belong together." "I already know we belong together," Sophia heard herself say, and then blushed at her own boldness. But Isaac just smiled. "So do I. But let's do it right anyway. You deserve that." He left then, and Sophia stood alone in her new home, listening to his footsteps fade into the night. She felt a pang of loneliness, but also an excitement that made her want to laugh out loud. Somehow, in the middle of a snowstorm and a failed train journey, she had found exactly what she had been looking for, even though she had not known she was looking for it. She had found a place and a purpose, and most unexpectedly of all, she had found a man who looked at her like she was worth waiting for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sophia threw herself into preparing for the school term, which would begin in early January. She met with the school board, a group of earnest men who seemed genuinely pleased that she had finally arrived. She cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized the few books and supplies that were available, and began planning lessons. The children of Tropic ranged in age from 6 to 14, and she would be teaching them all together in one room, which was familiar to her from her time in Missouri. The townspeople were welcoming, if a bit reserved at first. Sophia understood that, as a single woman and an outsider, she would have to earn their trust. She made a point of attending the community gatherings at the church, even though she was not Mormon, and she volunteered to help with various tasks around town. Gradually, people began to open up to her, sharing stories about their children and their hopes for what education could offer them. Hannah Montgomery became a good friend, stopping by the cottage regularly with fresh bread or baked goods and always ready for a chat. Sophia found herself confiding in Hannah about her growing feelings for Isaac, and Hannah's eyes would light up with barely concealed delight. "He's a good man, my brother," Hannah said one afternoon as they sat in Sophia's cottage drinking tea. "He's had a hard life in some ways, lots of loss and disappointment, but it never made him bitter. He just keeps moving forward, keeps helping people. I've been hoping for years that he'd find someone who could see how special he is." "I do see it," Sophia said softly. "From the very first day I saw it. He sees you too," Hannah said with a knowing smile. "When he looks at you, Sophia, it's like the sun coming out. I've never seen him like this with anyone, not even his ex-fiancée. This is different. This is real." Isaac returned to Tropic 3 weeks after he had left, riding into town on a cold January morning when Sophia was in the middle of teaching her first week of classes. She heard the commotion outside and tried not to get distracted, but one of the older boys glanced out the window and said, "Miss Daniels, there's a cowboy out there and he's just standing in the snow staring at the schoolhouse." Sophia's heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain calm. "That's nice, Thomas. Now, can you please solve the arithmetic problem on the board?" But the children had all turned to look now, and one of the little girls giggled. "He's really handsome, Miss Daniels. Do you know him?" "I might," Sophia said, trying not to smile. "But that doesn't mean we're going to stop our lessons. Everyone back to work, please." Somehow she made it through the next hour, though she was intensely aware of Isaac waiting outside. She had told him she would be teaching during the day, and she appreciated that he did not interrupt, but knowing he was there made it almost impossible to concentrate. Finally, she dismissed the children for the day and watched them stream out the door, several of them stopping to stare at Isaac before running off toward their homes. Then it was just the two of them, and Sophia walked out into the cold afternoon to find Isaac standing exactly where he had been when the boy first spotted him. He was covered in a light dusting of snow, as if he had been standing there for quite a while, and his face was red from the cold. "How long have you been waiting?" Sophia asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "A few hours," Isaac admitted. "I got here around mid-morning, but I didn't want to disturb your class. Figured I could wait." "A few hours? Isaac, you must be frozen." He shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "I didn't mind. You were worth every minute." It was an echo of what he had said that day at the platform outside town, and Sophia felt her throat tighten with emotion. Without thinking, she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him, not caring if anyone in town saw. He held her just as tightly, and they stood there in the falling snow, and Sophia felt like she had finally come home. "I missed you," she whispered against his chest. "I missed you too," Isaac said into her hair. "Every single day." They spent that evening at Hannah and James's house, sharing a meal and catching up. Isaac told them about his trip back to the station, how he had formally resigned from his railroad position and collected his final wages. He also mentioned, almost casually, that he had been talking to some ranchers in the area about work. "I'm thinking of settling around here permanent-like," he said, glancing at Sophia. "If that would be all right with certain people." "Certain people think that would be more than all right," Sophia replied, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "Well then, I reckon I'll start looking for a piece of land I can afford. Nothing big, but enough to run a few horses and maybe some cattle. James has been telling me about a parcel that might be coming available in the spring." James nodded enthusiastically. "It's about 5 miles from here, good water and decent grazing. The owner is looking to sell because he's getting too old to manage it himself. I could introduce you two if you're interested." "I'm very interested," Isaac said, and Sophia knew he was not just talking about the land. Over the following months, Sophia and Isaac courted properly, the way he had promised they would. He came to town as often as his work allowed, and they would walk together in the evenings or sit in her cottage talking by the fire. He brought her small gifts, things he had made himself or found on his travels: a smooth stone from a riverbed, a carving of a horse he had whittled from wood, a book of poetry he had traded for at the general store. Sophia treasured each one, not for their monetary value, but for what they represented, Isaac thinking of her when they were apart. They talked about everything during those long evenings. Isaac told her about his childhood in Nevada, about his father's death, and how he had had to become a man almost overnight. He spoke about the years of drifting, of never quite finding a place where he fit, and how that had made him both independent and lonely. Sophia shared her own stories, about growing up as the oldest of 4 children, about the weight of responsibility she had always carried, about losing her parents and feeling like she had lost her moorings entirely. "But then I came here," she said one night, "and I found you. Or you found me. And suddenly I don't feel lost anymore." "Neither do I," Isaac said, taking her hand. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly where I'm supposed to be." The courtship was not without its challenges. There were people in town who whispered about the propriety of a single schoolteacher spending so much time with a cowboy, and Sophia occasionally felt the weight of their judgment. But Hannah staunchly defended her, and gradually the gossip died down as people saw that Isaac's intentions were honorable, and that Sophia was not neglecting her duties as a teacher. In March, Isaac finalized the purchase of the land James had told him about. It was a beautiful piece of property with a creek running through it and views of the distant mountains. He began building a small house there, working on it every spare moment he had. Sophia would sometimes ride out to visit him on Sundays, her only day off from teaching, and she would watch him work with a sense of wonder. This was not just a house, she realized. It was a home he was building for them, even though he had not yet formally asked her to marry him. One Sunday in late April, when the snow had finally melted and the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom, Isaac took Sophia out to see the house. He had finished the main structure and was working on the interior now. It was simple but well built, with a main room, a bedroom, a kitchen area, and a small loft that could be used for storage or, someday, for children. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her face carefully as she looked around. "I think it's beautiful," Sophia said honestly. "I think you've built something wonderful here, Isaac." "I built it for you," he said quietly. "I know I should probably wait longer before saying this, that we've only been courting for a few months and people will say we're rushing. But I don't care what people say, Sophia. I love you. I think I started loving you that first day at the station when you got up off the ground after those robbers and didn't fall apart. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of pure happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes, Isaac, I'll marry you. I love you too. I think I have from the beginning." Isaac pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Sophia felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, this sense of being cherished and chosen, of having someone who saw all of her and loved what he saw. They were married in June, in a simple ceremony at the church in Tropic with Hannah and James as witnesses, and half the town in attendance. Sophia wore a dress that Hannah had helped her sew, pale blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Isaac wore his best suit, which he admitted he had only worn once before in his entire life. They exchanged vows in front of the minister, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and when Isaac kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at the Montgomery Ranch, with tables set up outdoors under the wide Utah sky. People brought food and music, and there was dancing and laughter that lasted well into the evening. Sophia felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance of the community. These people who had been strangers just 6 months ago and were now celebrating her joy as if it were their own. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Isaac and Sophia rode out to their new home, now fully finished and furnished. Isaac had been secretly working with Hannah to get everything ready, and when he carried Sophia over the threshold, she gasped at what she saw. The house was filled with small touches that made it feel like a home, curtains in the windows, a quilt on the bed that Hannah had made, wildflowers in a vase on the table. It was perfect. That night, they lay together in their marriage bed, and Isaac held Sophia close as they talked quietly about their future. "I want to make you happy," he said. "Every single day I want you to be glad you said yes to me." "I am glad," Sophia assured him. "I will always be glad." "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed, Isaac. You gave me a home and a purpose and a love that makes everything else make sense." They built a life together over the next few years, a life that was sometimes hard but always full of meaning. Sophia continued teaching at the schoolhouse, becoming beloved by her students and respected by their parents. Isaac ran his small ranch, building up a herd of horses that became known throughout the region for their quality and temperament. They worked together to improve their property, adding a barn and chicken coop, planting a garden, making the place truly theirs. In the spring of 1885, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a joy tempered by natural worry, as childbirth in this remote place was not without risks. But Hannah, who had experience with her own 2 children, promised to be there to help, and the town midwife was skilled and reassuring. Their son was born in late November, during the first snowstorm of the season. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Isaac feared he might lose Sophia. But she fought through it with the same strength she brought to everything else. And when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Isaac wept with relief and wonder. They named him James Harrison Anderson, after Isaac's father Harrison, and in honor of James Montgomery, who had become like a brother to Isaac. Little James had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes, and from the beginning, he seemed to have inherited both their stubbornness and their capacity for love. Sophia took a few months away from teaching to care for the baby, and Isaac doted on them both, often riding home in the middle of the day just to check on them. He would find Sophia nursing the baby or singing to him, and he would stand in the doorway just watching them, his heart so full he thought it might overflow. When Sophia returned to teaching in the spring, they made arrangements for a young woman from town to help care for James during the day. It was not ideal, but Sophia loved teaching and Isaac loved that she had something of her own beyond being a wife and mother. They made it work, supporting each other through the challenges of balancing work and family. As James grew from a baby into a curious toddler, Isaac taught him about horses and cattle, while Sophia read to him every night and encouraged his early attempts at learning his letters. They marveled at every milestone, every new word and discovery, and they talked about how they wanted to raise him to be strong but kind, independent but respectful, confident but humble. In the summer of 1887, Sophia became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter was born in March of 1888, on a day when the world was beginning to thaw from winter. They named her Rose Marie, and she was a sunny-tempered baby who seemed to smile from the moment she opened her eyes. With 2 children now, life became busier and more chaotic, but also richer. Isaac expanded his operations to include cattle along with the horses, and the ranch began to turn a decent profit. Sophia eventually had to give up her full-time teaching position, though she continued to tutor some of the older students in the evenings. She did not mind the change as much as she had feared she might. Being a mother filled her in ways she had not anticipated, and she found deep satisfaction in raising her children and managing the household. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. James grew into a serious boy who loved animals and the outdoors, clearly his father's son in temperament and interests. Rose was more outgoing, quick with a laugh and always asking questions, and Sophia saw herself reflected in her daughter's curiosity about the world. There were hard times too, of course. The winter of 1889 was brutal, with blizzards that killed livestock and left the family snowed in for weeks at a time. Isaac worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the animals alive, and Sophia worried about him constantly. But they made it through together, leaning on each other and on their faith that spring would eventually come. In 1891, Sophia had a miscarriage that devastated them both. She had been 3 months along when she lost the baby, and for weeks afterward she struggled with grief and a sense of failure. Isaac held her through the worst of it, never trying to minimize her pain or rush her through her mourning. He took over many of her duties with the children and the house, giving her time to heal both physically and emotionally. Slowly, with his support and the passage of time, Sophia found her way back to herself. They decided not to try for more children after that. Their 2 were healthy and thriving, and Sophia's body had been through enough. Isaac agreed completely, more concerned with his wife's well-being than with having a large family. They were content with what they had, grateful for the blessings they could count rather than longing for what might have been. As the years turned into a decade, Isaac and Sophia's love deepened in the way that long marriages do, when both people are committed to the work of it. They had arguments sometimes about money or child rearing or the endless small disagreements that arise when two people share a life. But they always talked through their differences, always chose to forgive and move forward. Their attraction to each other never faded either. Isaac still looked at Sophia like she was the most beautiful woman in the world, and she still felt her pulse quicken when he smiled at her in a certain way. The children grew and changed. By 1893, James was 7 years old and already helping his father with the ranch work in small ways. Rose, at 5, was learning to read and showing signs of the same love for teaching that her mother had. Sophia had begun offering lessons at their home a few days a week for the younger children in the area, and Rose would sit in on them, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. One evening in late summer of that year, Isaac and Sophia sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the chirping of crickets and the occasional call of a night bird. Isaac reached over and took Sophia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You ever think about that day at the station?" he asked. "When we first met?" "All the time," Sophia said softly. "It feels like it was yesterday and also like it was a lifetime ago. I stood there for hours that day, waiting to make sure you were safe. And then I stood there for hours outside this town, waiting to bring you here. And I've never regretted a single minute of any waiting I've ever done for you, Sophia. You were worth it then, and you're worth it now, and you'll be worth it every day for the rest of my life." Sophia turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole world, and she saw in his face the same love and devotion he had shown her from the very beginning. "I love you, Isaac Anderson," she said. "Thank you for waiting for me that day. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for choosing me back," Isaac replied, and he kissed her as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above them. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1895, Isaac's sister Hannah fell seriously ill with pneumonia, and the whole community rallied around the Montgomery family. Sophia spent days at Hannah's bedside, helping to nurse her friend back to health. Hannah eventually recovered, and the experience brought the two families even closer together. James Montgomery and Isaac worked their ranches cooperatively, often helping each other out with roundups and repairs. By 1897, James Anderson was 11 years old and had developed into a skilled horseman, much to his father's pride. Isaac began teaching him more advanced ranching skills, preparing him for the day when he might take over the operation. Rose, at 9, announced that she wanted to be a teacher just like her mother, and Sophia's heart swelled with pride and love. That same year, the schoolhouse in Tropic needed a new teacher again, and the school board approached Sophia about returning to the position full-time. She was torn, wanting to help the community but also not wanting to shortchange her own children. After many long discussions with Isaac, they came up with a solution. Sophia would teach during the school year, and they would hire a young woman to help with the household and watch Rose during the day. James was old enough now to spend his days working with his father, and Rose was old enough to be in school herself. It would not be easy, but they both believed it could work. Sophia returned to teaching that fall, and it felt like coming home. She had forgotten how much she loved working with children, seeing them learn and grow, helping them discover new ideas and possibilities. Her own children thrived too, proud of their mother and excited to have her more involved in the school community again. The turn of the century brought changes to Tropic and the surrounding area. The railroad finally extended a line closer to town, making travel and shipping much easier. New families moved in, and the town began to grow beyond its original boundaries. Isaac and Sophia watched these changes with a mix of appreciation and nostalgia for the simpler days when they had first arrived. In 1902, when Sophia was 40 years old and Isaac was 43, they celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. The children, now 14 and 12, helped plan a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from all over the area. It was a beautiful summer evening, and as Sophia looked around at all the people who had come to celebrate with them, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life they had built, this community they were part of, this family they had created together. It was more than she had ever dared to dream possible during those dark days after her mother's death, when she had boarded a train heading west into an uncertain future. Hannah gave a toast at the party, her voice thick with emotion. 16 years ago, my brother rode into town with a young woman he had rescued from a snowstorm. I took one look at the way he looked at her, and I knew she was the one he had been waiting for his whole life. And I was right. Isaac and Sophia, you two are proof that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that when you find it, you hold on tight and never let go. Here's to many more years of happiness together. Everyone raised their glasses, and Isaac stood up to respond. I don't have my sister's way with words, he began, but I want to say something anyway. Sophia, when I found you at that station, I thought I was just doing my job. I had no idea that I was meeting the person who would change everything for me. You gave me a reason to stop wandering. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. Every morning I wake up grateful, and every night I go to sleep thankful. You were worth waiting for, and you're worth every single thing I've done since to try to deserve you. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Sophia stood up to embrace her husband, not caring who was watching. You deserve everything good in this world, Isaac Anderson, she whispered in his ear. And I'm so grateful I get to be the one to try to give it to you. The party went late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Young James played the fiddle that his uncle James Montgomery had taught him, and Rose sang in a clear, sweet voice that made everyone stop to listen. Sophia danced with Isaac under the stars, and she remembered another dance, their wedding day, and how nervous and excited she had been. Now she just felt peaceful and complete, certain in her bones that this was exactly where she was meant to be. As James and Rose grew into young adults, they began to chart their own paths. James, true to his nature, wanted nothing more than to stay on the ranch and eventually take it over from his father. Isaac began teaching him the business side of things, the buying and selling, the contracts and negotiations that kept the operation running. They worked side by side, and their relationship deepened into not just father and son, but also partners. Rose, as she had predicted as a child, went off to the territorial capital to attend normal school and get her teaching certification. It was hard for Sophia to let her go, but she was so proud of her daughter's ambition and determination. Rose wrote home regularly, full of stories about her studies and her new experiences, and she came back for holidays and summers, always bringing fresh ideas and energy. In 1907, Rose graduated from normal school and accepted a teaching position in a town about 30 miles from Tropic. She was 20 years old, confident and capable, and Sophia saw so much of herself in her daughter. That fall, Rose met a young lawyer named Thomas Garrett who had recently moved to town, and by Christmas, she was bringing him home to meet the family. Sophia and Isaac liked him immediately. He was respectful and kind, clearly smitten with Rose, and he had a good sense of humor that suggested he would be able to handle her daughter's strong personality. Rose and Thomas were married in the spring of 1908, in a ceremony much larger than Isaac and Sophia's had been. It seemed like half the territory showed up to celebrate, a testament to how much the Anderson family had become part of the fabric of the community. Sophia cried through the whole ceremony, happy tears but also tears for how quickly time had passed, how recently Rose had been a baby in her arms, and now she was a married woman starting her own life. James, at 22, was still single and seemed in no hurry to change that status. He was devoted to the ranch and to helping his father, and Isaac sometimes worried that his son worked too hard and did not take enough time for himself. But James seemed content, and Isaac trusted that when the right woman came along, his son would know it. That assumption proved correct in 1910, when a new family moved to a neighboring ranch. They had a daughter named Alina, a capable young woman of 20 who could ride and rope as well as any man. James noticed her immediately, though he was too shy to approach her at first. Sophia and Isaac watched with amusement as their normally confident son turned tongue-tied and awkward around Alina. Eventually, with some gentle prodding from his mother, James worked up the courage to call on her, and a courtship began. Alina was perfect for James, strong and independent but also warm and funny. She fit into the Anderson family like she had always been part of it, and by the end of the year, James had asked her to marry him. They were wed in early 1911, and Alina moved into the ranch house with James, Isaac, and Sophia. It was an adjustment, having another woman in the house, but Alina was respectful of Sophia's place as matriarch, and they quickly developed a good working relationship that deepened into genuine affection. By 1912, Sophia was 50 years old and beginning to feel the weight of her years. Her body ached in ways it had not before, and she tired more easily. She had given up teaching a few years earlier, turning her position over to a younger woman, and now she focused her energy on the ranch and her growing family. Rose had given birth to twin daughters in 1910, making Sophia a grandmother, and she delighted in having the babies visit as often as possible. Isaac, at 53, was still strong and active, though he too had slowed down somewhat. He relied more heavily on James now to handle the physical work of the ranch, but he still made all the major decisions and kept a close eye on every aspect of the operation. He and Sophia had settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage, finishing each other's sentences and often communicating without words. One evening that spring, they took a walk together out to the spot where the old house had stood. They had built a larger home a few years back to accommodate the growing family, but Isaac had kept the original structure as a kind of shrine to their early years together. They stood there in the twilight, and Isaac put his arm around Sophia's shoulders. "Do you remember the first night we spent here?" he asked. "After the wedding." "Of course I remember," Sophia said, leaning into his warmth. "I was so nervous and excited I could hardly breathe, and you were so gentle and patient with me. I wanted everything to be perfect for you." "It was perfect. All of it has been perfect, Isaac, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because we got through them together." She turned to face him. "I know we're getting older, and I know that means our time is more precious than ever. But I want you to know that if I could go back and choose again, I would choose you every single time. You are the best decision I ever made." Isaac's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. "You are my whole world, Sophia. You always have been from that first day. I don't know how many years we have left, but I know I want to spend every single one of them loving you." They stood there holding each other as the stars came out, two people who had built a life out of a chance meeting and a willingness to take a risk on love. They had weathered storms and losses, celebrated triumphs and joys, raised children who had become good people, and through it all, Their love for each other had only grown stronger and deeper. In 1914, Elinor gave birth to a son, Isaac's first grandson, and they named him Harrison Isaac Anderson after both his great-grandfather and grandfather. Isaac held the baby with tears streaming down his face, overcome with emotion at this continuation of his family line. Sophia watched him with the baby and felt her heart expand with love for this man, who had been her partner and her love for nearly 30 years. Rose and Thomas added to their family as well, with a son born in 1915. The two families visited often, and holiday gatherings became large, noisy, joyful affairs with children running everywhere and laughter filling every corner of the house. Sophia would stand in the middle of it all sometimes and just marvel at what she and Isaac had created together. Out of nothing, out of a snow-covered station platform and a cowboy who had been willing to wait, they had built this legacy of love and family. As they moved into their 60s, Isaac and Sophia began to slow down more noticeably. Isaac officially turned the ranch over to James in 1920, though he still spent time out working when he felt up to it. Sophia spent her days helping with the grandchildren, raiding, and working in the garden she had cultivated over the years. They had both earned their rest, though neither of them was very good at actually resting. In the summer of 1923, on their 37th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, and the noise and chaos were wonderful. Someone had hired a photographer, and they took a formal portrait of Isaac and Sophia surrounded by their descendants. Looking at that photograph later, Sophia marveled at how much they had both aged. Isaac's hair was now completely white, and deep lines creased his face. She knew she looked equally worn by time, her own hair more silver than brown now, her face marked by the years. But when she looked into Isaac's eyes in that photograph, she saw the same love that had been there at the beginning, undimmed by time or circumstance. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Isaac and Sophia sat on their porch just as they had done thousands of times before. The night was warm and clear, and they could hear coyotes calling in the distance. 37 years, Sophia said wonderingly. Where did the time go into this? Isaac said, gesturing at the house, the ranch, the land around them. Into the life we built, into our children and grandchildren. The time went into everything good, Sophia. Do you have any regrets? She asked, a question she had never asked before. Isaac thought about it for a long moment before answering. I regret that I didn't find you sooner. I regret the years I spent wandering before you came into my life. But I don't regret anything that happened after I met you. Not one single thing. Neither do I, Sophia said softly. You kept your promise, Isaac. You made me happy every single day. Even the hard days, even when things were difficult, I was always glad I had you by my side. You were worth every minute, Isaac said, the words he had spoken so many times over the years. You still are. You always will be. They sat in comfortable silence after that, holding hands and watching the stars wheel slowly across the sky. They had been given a gift, Sophia thought, the gift of finding each other against all odds, of building something lasting and true. She knew they were nearing the end of their story, that the years ahead were fewer than the years behind, but she was not afraid. Whatever time they had left, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Isaac lived to be 72 years old, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1931. Sophia woke that morning to find him still beside her, his face serene, finally at rest after a life of hard work and love. She grieved him deeply, as did their children and grandchildren and the entire community that had known and respected him. But even in her grief, Sophia felt grateful. They had been given 45 years together, far more than many couples received, and not a single one of those years had been wasted. Sophia lived another 6 years after Isaac's death, surrounded by family and sustained by memories. She spent her final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had waited for her in the snow, who had seen something in her worth fighting for, who had loved her with a steadiness and devotion that had shaped every good thing in her life. She told them about the ranch and the early days, about the challenges and the joys, about building a life with someone who believed in her completely. Sophia Daniels Anderson died in her sleep in the winter of 1937, at the age of 75. She was buried next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. And at her funeral, the church was packed with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with neighbors and friends and students she had taught decades before. They laid her to rest as the snow began to fall, soft and gentle, like a blessing. The ranch continued on through the generations, passed from James to his children and eventually to their children. The house was maintained and updated but never torn down, a testament to the foundation that Isaac and Sophia had built. And every winter, when the snow covered the land and made the world clean and new, the family would tell the story again, the story of how it all began. They would talk about a station platform buried in snow, about a cowboy who waited for hours because he knew, somehow, that the woman he was waiting for would be worth every minute. They would talk about love found in the most unexpected place, and about how that love had rippled outward through time, touching lives that would never have existed if not for a chance meeting and two people brave enough to choose each other. It was a story that deserved to be remembered, a story that reminded everyone who heard it that love was always worth the wait, always worth the risk, always worth everything you could possibly give to it. And in that way, Isaac and Sophia Anderson lived on, not just in the blood and bones of their descendants, but in the very idea that true love, when you found it, was the greatest adventure of all.